Hey everyone, I'm Sheila. Welcome back to The Truth About Death and Dying. On the podcast today, I'm so happy to welcome Meg Hegeman. Hi Meg. Welcome to the show.
Hello.
I'm going to just do a little synopsis of who Meg is, just real quick. You are the owner and sole proprietor of Chickadee Facilitation, located in Presque Isle, Maine. Meg has worked in leadership development, strategic visioning, and cultural change for 30 years in a variety of large and small nonprofit organizations in Maine, Massachusetts, and Missouri. Meg has experience in emergency management, urban ministry, and substance use prevention. This diversity of work has led to relationships with people from all walks of life, which inform her perspective and practice. As an independent consultant, Meg facilitates organization development, culture change, conflict management, team building, and strategic planning. She teaches DEI and leadership topics, very important in this day and age. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science from Dickinson College, a Master of Divinity from St. Paul's School of Theology, and an Executive Certificate of Organization Development, Consulting, and Change Leadership from Georgetown University's Institute for Transformational Leadership. That's quite a resume you got there. I like it. You're a Jackie of all trades. I feel like I'm kind of that way, but I don't have all the college to back me up.
Oh, that's just a lot of letters. It sounds more impressive than it is, but when it's all put together, I'm like, oh, I'm not flighty at all. That makes it
No,
sound.
not at all. That's awesome. Um, One of the things, and we met at an HR convention, which was funny. But then we sat down and this death topic came up, and this is how we managed to be here. And I always like to start my podcast off with a disclaimer that I'm not an expert in anything, and I forgot to do that. Um,
Yeah, me either.
but you know, you get life experience, and that makes up for it sometimes. I so part of your experience in history was you were a pastor at a church in Missouri, correct?
Yes. Yeah, I
Yes.
was ordained in the United Methodist Church, and so while I was in seminary, I served two real tiny congregations because that was part-time because I was a full-time student. And then when I graduated, I was appointed full-time to serve Wilkes Boulevard United Methodist Church. The Methodist system is an appointive system, so you go where the bishop sends you. And I
Okay.
was at Wilkes for 6 years altogether.
Okay. And reading about this, and I'm gonna share this link at the end of the podcast. And it's hard to like put links up where people can click it and go to it, but I'm just still gonna put it up there, and hopefully they can find it okay. But it was I grew up in the Methodist Church, and I wouldn't call myself a religious person at this point in my life, but I am spiritual and I have my beliefs, and but I liked growing up in the Methodist Church compared to my friends who grew up like in the Catholic Church, because it seemed to me that was all like hell and brimstone and that kind of thing. And like I always felt like the Methodists were just like, we're kind of laid back here, so I liked that piece of it.
Focus on
But what I
grace.
really liked,
Yes.
what's that?
It's a focus on grace, definitely.
Yes, yes. And what I liked about your backstory was the fact that you came to this church and you had a mission.
Yeah. So, I would say that the mission kind of evolved. So I didn't go in with a mission other than to kind of learn and see. And initially it was a little bit rough because there were people who wanted me to come in with all the answers because they were small and struggling like most churches in any denomination. Um, but I kept saying, I don't even know where the restrooms are yet, so don't ask me what the mission is of this church. Um, so it took a little bit of time of listening, and actually we'd done a lot of kind of community outreach, and it was a death that sort of, I would say, revealed what that congregation was meant to do in that place. And so that's really what got things started for the mission, because at that point it was abundantly clear what we needed to be doing.
Yeah. And can you speak to that death, because it is in the article, but I'd like your take, and then I've got some little notes that I'm going to follow up with, or quotes I should say, not notes but quotes.
Yeah,
Go ahead.
sure. So we had been the neighborhood around the church building had transitioned quite a lot, and it was working class neighborhood, small homes, and so it had shifted demographically, and there were definitely quite a few neighbors who were experiencing homelessness, and we had started to develop relationships with some of them, and then there was one of those neighbors was murdered, pretty brutally, and his encampment was near the highway that came through town. So anyway, what we noticed, I guess there was a short blurb in the newspaper about his death, and some of his friends in the community made comments, as you can do, and it's generally a bad idea to read comments that are
Yes,
posted. But in this case, what we saw were comments about how no one would care about this death because the man was experiencing homelessness, and that it was a shame that his friends wouldn't have an opportunity to gather. And it was actually a parishioner, one of the lay leaders, who came to me as the pastor, and she had seen these comments, and I said, well, that's us, that's what we do, right?
right.
It seems to be this fallacy among a lot of people. I've seen it many times in places where they think a funeral is expensive, and it's a topic for a different day. The embalming or cremation or whatever, the disposition of the body can be expensive, but a service shouldn't cost anything. Like,
Right.
to be able to gather for a memorial or a celebration of life or a funeral, whatever you want to term it, that should have zero cost involved. So we said, the very least we can do is open up our doors for that. And so we put the word out that we would host an opportunity, and I had never met this man. But when we put the word out, people who did know him came, and we ended up, the animal control officer in town stopped by the church, and she had known him quite well because he had a dog, and his
Aw.
pet his dog was often getting in trouble, and so she would she was the one who got to know the dog because she was
Yeah.
sent out to catch him. So she brought me this photo of Jerry and his dog, and that was the only photograph that we had. So we kind of set that as the focal piece, and so we allowed the friends and family, whoever, to gather. We had said that we would host this thing, and one of the most touching pieces was that he had an aunt and uncle that were still living, and that had driven in for the service. And when they came in, his aunt brought this childhood photo, the gray and white, black and white photo of Jerry when he was probably 3 or 4 years old, and he was holding a stuffed dog.
Oh.
And you had the juxtaposition of these two photographs of this, starched white shirt with a collar and khaki pants and a little stuffed dog of a 3 or 4-year-old boy next to the long gray scraggly hair looking
Yeah.
man who had clearly fallen on hard times with his dog. And the juxtaposition of those was really striking, and it made me realize, and it became a point that we did a lot of education around how people get to this point of experiencing homelessness, did a lot of education with young people around, like, that 4-year-old kid did not dream that he would be bludgeoned to death by
End
the
up that
sun,
way, right?
right?
Yeah,
Nobody's life goal. And
yeah,
so have some compassion, right?
yeah,
Have some awareness in your own life of what you're going through and what it takes. And so we talked a lot about support systems and mental health and just all kinds of different things. So, but that really launched us in this direction of, there are people who, there are some very simple things that are basic acts of human dignity to allow a gathering, to facilitate a gathering of friends and family in the face of death and grief.
yeah.
Yeah, so.
And I think that's really important too. I've talked and I've spoke about it in previous podcasts as well. That I feel like people deserve to be honored for their life. And even if they don't want it, a lot of times they're like, oh, I don't want anything. But it's really not for them. It's for the people that are living that need to gather, that need to have that time to, cry or laugh or whatever it is that they need to do, and just it's part of the grieving process, I think. So, and you guys did, and I hope the viewers will read this article, because you're just phenomenal, and I think that you are the epitome of what Christianity is, whether you're going to church or not. And that's my big thing, is that the people that act like real Christians and people that don't. and to me, being a Christian is trying to emulate Jesus, whether you believed in Jesus or not, or but the teachings of being kind to each other, taking care of each other, that's a big deal. And I just, there's a couple of things that struck me about this article, and one of them, excuse me, sorry, I'm getting over this rotten cold, and I hope I don't go into a big coughing fit. But so once you kind of started taking on the home, and I'm gonna kind of shorten the whole thing, but
It's a long phrase.
but long story short is you started taking in the homeless, and you started reaching out into the community, and trying to revive. And I know that Methodist church, like the Methodist church that I grew up in, was all old people. There was not a young vibe about it. It was very, there were a few and far between, but the majority of the congregation were older folks.
That's very much where we were when we started.
And I find that people get very set in their ways, and they don't want to change. And when someone comes in and says, let's shake this up a little bit, that they get all panicky. So this is from the article, and it says, church members arranged what Hegeman called a lynch the pastor meeting. And I can just picture this in my head. With the direct superintendent and bishop. Susan March, a lay leader and 20-year member of the church, was there. It was awful, March said. It was so much emotion, and people cried, people yelled, people stormed out. She recalled complaints about homeless people being drunk and snoring in church. March said the superintendent understood the concerns, but said, the thing is that you guys don't have alcohol to serve them. You have Jesus. Hegman said her superior, you had your full support, and all about 20 left and the rest stayed. Mm-hmm. Is that right?
Yeah.
And then this quote from her, from Susan, correct? I got Susan Marsh,
yes.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. She said, the breath of God just went through and invigorated people. We started attracting people that liked the church because it actually had feet and hands and was going out to meet people where they were in life. Meg really broke down barriers here. We have attracted people who really believe in this mission. And I just love that bit about hands and feet, because that really gives you a great visual of getting out into the community, talking to people, and making them feel a part of something bigger than themselves, and I think meeting them where they're at and not where you're at is a big deal.
One of the things that I think was really important in retrospect was to name, so the congregation was like 100 years old, right? I mean, it had been around for a long time. And yes, it was very elderly and very white and very uniform in its understanding of how life works. Um, and one of the things that I had to do was say, I mean, they had the option, right? Um, they, as with many small congregations, they were on the verge of dying, right? And so it was sort of this: do you want to go out with a sigh, right? And
Yeah.
have essentially, I gave them the option of asking for a change in leadership to get a pastor who would essentially be a hospice chaplain,
Oh
who
boy.
would
Yeah.
who would allow them comfort, right? Just don't cause us any pain, right?
Right.
It
Right.
was very, very similar in the kinds of conversations we have or should have about any death. So one option was just, we don't want to be in any pain, just don't make us suffer, and we'll just die,
And that'll be the end of the
okay.
church.
Right.
Yeah.
Or we can get treatment. There are treatments that might work. There's still a risk of death. I mean, it was all it was very similar to a human, right? But there's a possibility that it could work, right? And in that case, if it works, it's still going to feel like a death, because it's not going to be what you know right now. It's
Right.
going to be
You're still
different.
going to
And
mourn
any
what
change,
used to be.
right,
Yeah.
right. Any change is a sort of a death of what used to be, right? And by
Right.
naming it that way and phrasing it that way, it really helped those who stayed have compassion for the ones who left. Because they could recognize that all of the reactions, the anger, the sadness, like all of that was a grief response. And so they didn't
Yeah.
take it as personally, and they could be supportive of their friends and family members. They didn't say, "You're right, we shouldn't be doing this," but they said, "I'm really sorry that this hurts so much," and
Yeah.
and they could kind of sit with them in that pain, which was
Yeah.
really cool.
Yeah. That makes sense. So, I just think it's great how how you turn this whole thing into like a really great situation for the local people, and you got like the congregation grew, and I feel like
Yeah.
you left it in good hands, and in good shape. And
I did.
do you still check
I
in?
wouldn't
Do you still have
romanticize it too much.
no?
I mean, the ministry is still so. Turning Point was the name of the ministry that we created, and it was called that because the intention was to have it be mutual transformation for people in poverty as well as those with more financial means who were donating or volunteering, so that it wasn't, we're doing this for or to you, but we're in this together.
Together.
And
That's
so
nice.
so that was the model. That is still going strong. The congregation itself it never got huge. It's still small, and they're still struggling.
Yeah.
But I think we did what the intention was there in terms of, they're definitely not going out with a sigh. If they go out, I mean, they're still
Right.
kicking, but they're in
Yeah, that's
another
good.
one of those discernment times of
Yeah. It's a great article, and I hope the viewers will give it. It's not very long, but it's really great. I think it was uplifting, and I liked it a lot. But let's talk about planning, or designing. I like that phrase, designing your own funeral. That sounds more like I'm going to design my thing, and because I think it is so important, like for people to be recognized. I had some family members who, they were just like, nope, don't want anything, and I'm like, but that's really like, that's hard for the ones that are left behind.
You bet.
The ones that have died are gone. They don't,
Right.
I think once you're gone, you don't care anymore what's going on down here. So, so let's talk about, and you have a great template, which I'm going to also share. I'm gonna try to put it up at the end if I can figure it out. I'm gonna put it up at the end of the podcast. But also, if anyone is interested, I will put my email address across the screen as I always do, and you can email me, and I'll be happy to send you this template if you want it. Thank you, Meg, for that. So it's I'm gonna just hand it over to you and get your thoughts and did you create this yourself? You created this yourself?
Yeah, I did.
Okay.
I did. So, and I've done it a couple of different times because funeral directors and or hospice folks, but funeral directors in particular will plan with people for the disposition of their body, and they will ask things like, who do you want for your pallbearers, or, you know, make arrangements for burial or cremation or whatever, those kinds of things. And sometimes they'll ask for hymns, mostly because they're trying to figure out how many honorariums they need to add into the budget, right? So if you're going to have live music or, you know, those kinds of things. And so as a pastor, I would get that information, and sometimes I would know people and sometimes I would not. One of the aspects of the appointment system in the Methodist tradition is that you know, you could be reappointed 3 years, 7 years, whenever, and when you first get in, you haven't met anybody yet, but you're still the pastor for that community, and you're still providing care after death. So I was looking for a way to get more in touch with who the person was, and I actually found some families were really good storytellers, and you could just say, you know, help me know your loved one, and they just start telling stories all over the place. And then it was really pretty easy for me to weave together, to find the essence of who that person was and weave it together. But there are a lot of families, and especially in times of grief, right? You got that shock going on.
Right.
And they would just clam up.
I don't know anything about this person.
Yeah. It was like, well, what holidays did they like?
My mom, but I don't know anything.
Yeah. They just couldn't say much. So, so I actually found it was even less helpful. So let's say I'd been a pastor for, 3 years, and I'd visited with this person in a nursing home, right?
Mm-hmm.
But, and so then the family might say, well, you knew them. I'm like, I didn't know. I knew the last 3 years of this person's life.
Right.
I did not know what made them laugh when they were in their 20s. I don't know how they were as a parent or a sister or so it was really selfish reasons that I created this tool, because I thought, it's just for me to be able to provide good care during a celebration of life, I need some help figuring out who this person is. So that's what really gets to the tool.
And I'm going through the end of life doula training. I only have like a couple more modules to do, and then I'll be officially a end of life doula. And I think this is going to be great for what I'm going to be doing, because that's a big part of a doula is helping people get this piece under control. And it's funny because when my dad wasn't funny when my dad was dying, but it was interesting when my dad was dying because he wanted to help me write his obituary.
Nice.
And so, but he was at the point where he was like, no, I said, well, Dad, why don't we just record it and then I will transcribe it, he's like, no, I want to write it myself. I said, okay. And at this point, he was too far gone to get himself into his little office so he could, type it out, which I think would have been easier for him. So he decided he was going to start handwriting it. And he got to high school graduation, and that was it. I'm like, well, I could have probably handled that piece of it, but then like
Right.
the rest of your life, and
Yeah.
so, we had to wing it because by the time, he got that far, that was as far as he got. And then he died and we had to, my mother, luckily, my parents were divorced for, I think, 35 years, but still great friends. So my mother, she still gave respite care for us. And so it was great that they still had that relationship. And also that we could tap her knowledge for all the history that, when they were together and raising us and all that. So, but, yeah, it's nice to have the input if you can get it, but you can't always.
Exactly. Well, and that's one of the reasons I wanted to kind of get younger people, healthier people, thinking about this tool, right?
Yeah.
Because it's a lot easier. So I have my obituary saved on my computer, and my husband knows where it is, and I can update it and change it as life
Yeah,
goes on.
of course.
Um, but yeah, it's hard to do when my mother had dementia, and so her ability to participate in any of that was gone much, years before her
Yeah.
body was gone. Um, Fortunately, both of my parents had participated in one of these workshops that I did, and
Nice.
so yeah, it was great. And so we had some things to go on. So one of the keys in the tool is to think through really the whole life. And some of this, the other inspiration for this, and we'll talk about the kind of the importance of metaphor. Um, there's, I hear complaints often about people who attend a memorial service or a funeral, and it's terrible in their opinion, right?
I've been to some of those.
Yeah, I mean,
I
the
want to walk out of a funeral and go, oh my, I didn't know this or that about this person. I want to learn some new stuff,
yeah,
but I also want to feel like, I mean, I've been to funerals where I'm like, did they even mention the person's name?
exactly. Yeah, that's what I've heard more often than anything. And some clergy will have like a standard script that is not in any way personalized or meaningful. Um, so to avoid that, right? And even sometimes people who, um, like children, right? Like I know how my parents parented. Fortunately, I'm in Aroostook County, and we have a whole bunch of storyteller tradition up here. So people just get together, and that is our entertainment. We go sit around a campfire and tell stories. um,
Right, yeah.
you know, so I had lots of stories about how they hung out with their friends, how they were good siblings, or some of their parents' reactions to them when they were younger. Um, but if you're not from a storytelling family, you don't have those. And so it's helpful. I mean, I usually will try to speak with the siblings, the friends, those kinds of people, in addition to the immediate family, because all of those relationships matter, and all of those people
Yeah.
are grieving. So, getting some of that, if we are healthy enough to be doing some of this preparation, then you can
Yeah.
help those to remember you well by filling in some of those blanks for
Right.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you forget, I mean, the older you get, like my friends will tell me stories, and I'm like, I don't have any recollection of that. And they're like, yes, we did this and that. And so it's good that everyone kind of has their own memories of the past, so you don't have to remember everything yourself. That's kind of nice. It's just the beauty of having,
Exactly.
family and friends and people that remember, because, and some people like, I got a terrible memory. I don't remember anything, but it's amazing sometimes the things they can pull out of their memory bank that, you know,
Yeah, I
so,
think the ideal situation would be to use a tool like this with some friends and family around, so that you can
yeah,
say, that's one of the reasons I do workshops for people, is like, hey, let's get together and talk about this stuff. Because as you start talking, you're like, oh, I remember that. Or,
yeah,
yeah.
yeah.
So I think, and people never believe me, but I think it's fun.
I, I, I know it's a very, we need to make it more, just what's the word I'm looking for? Just common like just
Yeah.
to talk about death and talk about stuff. And people are like, like I think they think it's they're going to jinx themselves and then they're going to just drop dead. I'm like, well, maybe, but probably not, you know. But I think that it needs to be more of a conversation, and I don't know why. And it seems like in this country we're very like, oh no no we can't talk. But in other countries they're just very free with their conversations about death. It's a part of life. We're all going to die.
Absolutely. It's Yeah, it's one of the least healthy parts of our culture, I think, and it's one of
Yeah.
the reasons I'm so glad that you do this podcast because there's such a negative stigma. And when I do these workshops, I start out by saying like, okay, repeat after me. I am human. And humans die. I will die. Like that.
It's hard for people to get that
It is
out of their mouth. Like,
surprising to me.
I
Like
don't want to die, but yeah, no, yeah, we're you know we all want to hang on as long as we can, as long as it's going to be good. But you know,
yeah, I just think as a culture we have a really unhealthy relationship with death, and
yes,
that's why
we do.
it's so hard
Yeah,
to get there. Um, but the one other thing I'll say about this tool that is helpful, and one of the things that inspired it is I went to a funeral service one time for a person that I had not known him. Members of his family were in the church that I was serving, and so their father had died, and so I went to his funeral kind of to support them. And so the pastor who was leading the service did what I thought that was the most beautiful message I'd ever heard. And he used the gentleman was one of these guys in a small town who really loved the parades, and he was always helping make the parades happen and drive the lawn tractor or do whatever. And so the pastor used the metaphor of a parade to walk us through this man's life.
oh, that's
And
great.
it was the coolest thing I had ever heard, and it became my go-to. He had like the first float was childhood on the farm, and fishing in the pond and all of that kind of stuff. And then the next float that came along was his marriage, meeting the woman who would become his wife. And then there was one for his work and his family and retirement. And it was so beautifully done. And it not only did I learn things about him, but it was so memorable.
Yeah, I can imagine it was like you could almost like paint a picture of it. Like you can envision the little float going by with him as a little kid, and on the farm. And yeah, that is cool.
It was
That is
really, yeah, it was just mind blowing
very
to me.
creative. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that's what I have done, and without fail, when I'm able to find that metaphor that resonates with people, I get just the reactions, the responses are really heartfelt, and sometimes it transitions to imbuing physical items with meaning. So one woman embroidered tea towels, and that was kind of her thing, right? For church bazaars or craft fairs or whatever, she embroidered tea towels. And so that was the metaphor that I used of different scenes that might be on different tea towels for different parts of her life. Well, all of the grandchildren and great-grandchildren were getting tea towels from their grandmother, great-grandmother, whatever. And so it imbued those items with even more meaning.
I love that.
Than,
Yeah.
I mean, they already represented that
Yeah.
person to them, but they had a deeper understanding of who she
Yeah,
was.
that's
So,
awesome. Yeah.
And there's
That's
so
really
many,
that's so creative. Like it's such a creative, cool way to like paint a picture, like really, because that's what telling a story of this person's life or painting a
Exactly.
picture of it, and yeah,
Yeah.
that's really cool.
So that's why in the one of the questions in the tool is what metaphor or motto would you use for your life? I've used baseball games. I've used one man was a uh, made it was like a die and cast maker, and so he would make
Okay. Yep.
patterns out of
Mhm.
things, and that was fascinating to me uh, as a way to make a living. Um, and so yeah, there's just endless ways that you can find something. Gardens, a school day for a teacher, a house. That's what I use for my
Yep.
dad. Um, yeah, so there's just things that resonate with you will help others come to know you better, right? And it
Yeah.
just the metaphor provides a framework that then people can flesh it out, and really it's about painting a picture, right? So that
Yeah.
folks can recognize your
I
life.
love that. Yeah, I love that. That's great. What other points would you make about this before we wrap up our conversation? What is there any other points on here that you'd like to speak to
Yeah.
or about?
The only other thing I would say is that we can have a tendency to uh, only say good things, right? We don't want to
Yeah,
acknowledge pain or loss. We want
right.
to, like, it's
Because
part of
people
this.
hate to speak, like, don't speak ill of the dead.
Right. Yeah, yeah.
Don't. I think I did at my dad's funeral, though. I think I was like, everyone. And my dad was a jovial, happy-go-lucky man. He really was a great guy, but he wasn't perfect either, And I think I
Right.
can't even remember now what I said, but I was like, oh, people are probably going to give me a hard time about that. But you know, but he was human. We're all human. We all are. Nobody's perfect. So,
And I think it's kind of disingenuous to to kind of review and to celebrate a person's life without acknowledging that we all struggle. There are
yeah,
times in our lives, right? We face grief
yes,
and loss, and so I think it's a helpful and more holistic picture to include things like, um, you know, they if somebody lost a child at a young age or whatever, if they battled a cancer or some disease or whatever the things might be, divorce, that that they went through and lived through are important not only to recognize the fullness of who they are, but it also helps us as people in grief to remember that we'll get through this too.
that I love that. I love
That makes
that. Yeah, yeah.
sense. And there are ways to phrase. I'll end with this. When I did the service for Jerry, the homeless man that I'd never met before, and I didn't have this metaphor tool yet. I said, I never met him, but there are some things that I know. I know that he loved, and I know that sometimes the love that he shared was not in the way that it could be received. And I know that because we all experience that. We're all human,
Yeah,
right?
yeah,
And so I've had some people at sometimes come to me and say, you need to know that my mother or my dad was not a good person, right? And don't, I'm going to struggle because people are going to say how wonderful they were. And
yeah.
so there, I don't, I don't think that anyone is a bad person. I think they behave badly.
Mm-hmm.
And I think often that is motivated by, you know, grief or pain or unrequited love or whatever those kinds of things might be. And I think you can name those things in a way that is not airing dirty laundry because it's simply
Yeah,
naming the human condition.
yeah,
I think that helps us honor the wholeness of who someone
yeah,
is, and it honors the grief in people who have very mixed emotions at the time of death.
Yeah. And that's a good point to bring up, that, because not everybody had a dad like me, a good man, hard worker, good to everybody he met. And, I know I'm lucky with the parents that I got. I'm very blessed for that. But I know a lot of people who despise their parents, but and some maybe just will be like, I'm not going to go to a funeral. If, I'm sure there's all kinds of, scenarios, but because then there's the guilt factor. The people, you can't, it's your parent and you despised your mother, but she's dead and you still have to go do this thing. So I think that is important to try to paint a more realistic picture without airing the dirty laundry, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah, you don't have to throw anybody under the bus.
There's creative ways you can do that.
Yeah. Yeah.
If you folks out there are listening and you need help, hit us up. We'll help you.
Absolutely. Yep. We can think through or come up with language for all kinds of stuff.
That's right. Well, Meg, thank you so much for being here today with me, and we're going to bring you back, and we'll do another podcast too. But thank you so much for joining us today. I feel like I need to have you on several times just to tap all that information you got in your head.
No worries. I appreciate the opportunity, and thank you for doing the podcast, because it really is important.
I'm happy to do it. I'm happy to do it. It speaks to me. It's a bit of a calling, I think. So thank you. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. We'll see you next time.